Harry Patowski has appeared before this group on a number of occasions. He was, up until most recently, historian at the National Park Service Washington office. But back before that, he's now retired, but before that, since about 81, he's been an adjunct professor at George Mason. And in 78, he's been an adjunct at Northern Virginia Community College, mostly at the Loudoun and Manassas campuses, but sometimes they have a special course out in Reston. After he retired, he was able to teach courses during the day, and George Mason asked him to teach a course called World Civilization in one term. And it's taught usually Western Civ 101 and 102. So he was teaching world history, and you know, India got like 5 minutes.
Actually 2.5 minutes.
It is ridiculous. But anyway, he has taught a number of times World War I, and you know, war in the Pacific, and then the war in Europe, and then he's taught World War I. Just as a little background from my personal opinion about things, very few people know anything at all about World War I, and as far as its effect on us today, and Harry is going to point that out. Just two things as a reminder. The whole Middle East was a very important theater in World War I, and it was handled very badly, both militarily and then, of course, after the war. If you saw Lawrence of Arabia, it's pretty clear what happened. The British and the French and so forth, they screwed everything up, and we're paying for it today. Another thing that happened is the islands in the Pacific, many of them, particularly the Marianas, where I was from World War II, the Marianas were the property of the German government. And the Japanese were on our side in World War I. And when the war ended, the Marianas, along with a few other islands, were given to the Japanese. And of course we owned Guam at the time, but then when the Japanese swept in, they took Guam like that. And so we then ended up with a place called Saipan and Tinian, which was occupied by the Germans, which was by the Japanese, which they got from being on our side during World War I. So there's a number of important political things that happened during World War I. It was a very complex war, and as you'll find out, and you probably already know, that the rise of Hitler and his crowd had a lot to do with what went wrong at the end of World War I, and how the politicians, as usual, screwed everything up. So let me let you start with Harry Patowski, our historian. Harry?
Well, thank you very much. Now you will excuse me, I'm going to sit for part of the presentation up here, and then I'll stand when I do my slideshow presentation. The reason I like to sit is, since I was here last time, I've had 2 knee operations. Yes. Oh, since I was here last time, I had 2 knee operations, 2 hernia operations, and since I thought I was having operations, I decided I had 2 cataract operations. A couple words of advice. You ever go to see your doctor about a sore knee, and he says, you know, I think you need a replacement. What you do is you don't walk out of his office, you run out of the office as fast as you can go. The second thing is, getting old is not easy. I seem to be spending all my time in the doctor's. It's a good thing I retired. I mean, I'm busier today than I ever was, like every week. 1 or 2 doctors, and taking my wife to 1 or 2 doctors. So that's neither here nor there. But my knee is fine. You can see me limping well. What the heck? I'm limping. Now, usually, I've been teaching World War I for 20 years. Usually when I teach the World War II class, I ask the class, number 1, are there any World War II vets? Because I've been teaching that for almost 25 years. Sometimes a hand will go up. Sometimes my students think I'm a World War II vet. And I said, well, no, I was alive during World War II, but I was a little young to be drafted. So far, none of my students have asked me if I'm a World War I vet. But World War I is 100 years ago, but then again, it's not that far along. I'm sure everyone in this class knows a World War I vet, or remembers a World War I vet. I know in my family we had World War I vets in the family. How many people have had World War I vets in their family? World War I? Sure. I mean, there are a lot of Americans that served in that war, as well as a lot of Europeans who served in that war. So we all know World War I vets. And actually, the last American World War I vet died in 2012. That was Frank J. Buckles. He died in the spring of 2012. Was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. So it's a long way. It's 100 years ago, but then again, it's not 100 years ago. Now, just for further information, when I teach my World War I class, I have 4 books that I have them read. Barbara Tuchman, The Guns of August. If you're looking for one book to read on World War I would recommend Barbara Tuchman. A superb historian. She published this in 1962. Pulitzer Prize winning book. It's been in print ever since that time. I recommend Alistair Horn, The Price of Glory, done in 1916. Just the battle of Verdun, what it was like when they fed you into that hall. The troops going up to Verdun on the French side, they went up a road called the Sacred Way, and you could see Verdun at night. It was like a furnace with fire on the horizon, and you were being poured into that fire. In Germany and France, that's what Germany and France did for 9 months in 1916. They poured main material, they poured the entire accumulated wealth of their societies that accumulated for the previous 150 years in that fire. They managed to kill and wound about 800,000 men. What did they do it for? Nothing. What had changed? Nothing. That's the insanity of the war. Now, you can't talk about World War I and we're talking about the Russian Revolution. And the book that I recommend on the Russian Revolution is a book by John Reed. John Reed was actually American, and he wrote a contemporary history of the Russian Revolution. He was over there, and he wrote a detailed history. Now, he's virtually the only one. Leon Trotsky wrote a history of the Russian Revolution, but no one else. Lenin, Stalin, Bukharin, Kamenev, Zinoviev, nobody wrote a history of the Russian Revolution that participated in it from the Bolshevik side. Why? Because Stalin killed them all in the 1930s. So they never got around to writing their memoirs. Incidentally, in terms of writing memoirs, one of the first memoirs that came out on the war was a memoir by General Erich Ludendorff, who was commander of all the German armed forces from 1916 to 1918. And he was really the driving force in German military and foreign policy during that period of time. Ludendorff resigns his position in October 1918 when he sees how the war is going and his health breaks. By June of 1919, he's publishing his 2-volume history of the First World War. How he had time to do that, I don't know. He actually publishes his volume just 3 weeks after the Versailles Conference is completed and everybody signs. But Ludendorff was the first to get out his history. Then another book I recommend, and many of you know this and probably read it, Maria Remarque, called Quiet on the Western Front. It talks about a young man by the name of Paul Bauer who enlists in the Army, very idealistic. We're going to fight for Germany, we're going to die for Germany, and then he gets exposed to the reality of the war. And he realized he's been lied to by his teachers, by the elders of the society, by the government. He sees the true horror and meaninglessness of the war. So these are some books that I would recommend to you. Now let me just give you a few of Barbara Tuchman. Yes.
What was Reed's book title? I mean, it was nice of you to think that we could read it back here because it's so big, but I can't.
It's called 10 Days That Shook the World. John Reed. You can look on the internet, on Amazon for John Reed, you'll find only one book. Why? He died right after he wrote it.
What was Tuchman's name?
Barbara. I'll leave these books up here. Barbara W. Tuchman.
What's the name of the
The
book?
Guns of August.
On Guns of August. Okay.
The Guns of August. Now, she's written about 8 or 10 books. Very fine historian. All right. I'll leave them up here and you can come up and take a look at it. And everybody's familiar with Remarque, right? Remarque actually served in the war as a young man, and this is semi-autobiographical.
Oh, yay.
Ah, good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Much better.
Usually I don't have this problem. But let me just read you you know, the opening lines of Tuckman. She's describing the funeral of Edward VII in May 1910, which is the last grand event of royalty in the 19th century. And everybody was there. The English were there, the French, the Kaiser was there, the Russians were there. And this is what she says: "So gorgeous was the spectacle on the May morning of 1910 when 9 kings rode in the funeral of Edward VII of England, that the crowd, waiting and hushed and black-clad all, could not keep back gasps of admiration. And scarlet and blue and green and purple, 3 by 3, the sovereigns rode through the palace gates, plumed with helmets, gold braid, crimson sashes, and jeweled orders flashing in the sun. After them came 5 heir apparent, 40 more imperial royal highnesses, 7 queens, 4 dowagers, and 3 regnant, and a scattering of special ambassadors from uncrowned countries. Together they represented 70 nations, and the greatest assemblage of royalty and rank that had ever been gathered in one place, and of its kind the last. The muffled tongue of Big Ben told 9 by the clock as the cortege left the palace, but on history's clock it was sunset. The sun of the old world was setting in a dying blaze of splendor, never to be seen again." Isn't that beautiful language? I always tell my students, if you want to be a good historian, you have to know how to write. Take English. Read a lot of literature and learn how to write. But good historians like Barbara Tuckman, when they write, they're painting word pictures. So when you write and you paint a word picture, that's when history becomes meaningful to you. All right, I'm going to leave these books up here. Now, let me say something about the war. It's called the First World War, right? No, it's not the First World War. It's the Great War. And that's the title it was given at the time, and that's the title. Is it still working? And that's the title it has, in my mind, today. Because the First World War was a cataclysmic event. It marks the divide between the 19th and the 20th century. The world of 1914 and the world of 1919 were totally different. Absolutely. In every way you can think about. It's not just the scale of the war. The war, took place not only in Europe, it took place in the Middle East, it took place in Africa. There were actions on the high seas at Jutland in the North Sea, in the South Atlantic, in India, in the Indian Ocean. But it has to do with the change of society, with the change in political institutions, the disappearance of governments, the way people perceive themselves and the world. And the First World War also gave us a lot of movements which we probably could have done without in the 20th century. First World War gave us communism. Boy, that was a really good thing to have. The Bolsheviks will come to power in 1918, and they will remain in power in Russia until 1989, 1990. The First World War gave us fascism. Just think of what the world would have been like if you didn't have Adolf Hitler in power, or Mussolini in power, but especially Adolf Hitler. The First World War was the beginning of the decolonization of the British and French empires. Now, it's not apparent at first. In fact, the empires expand, but the seeds for decolonization have already been sown. There were 1.5 million from India who served in the British Army. Probably almost 1 million men from Australia and New Zealand and Canada. And after they came back from the war, let's just say their opinion of England, the British government and British leadership was not what you would want to be. First World War also saw the rise of America as a great power. Now, America is a great power. America demonstrates its power in 1898 in the war against Spain, but, Spain was the third great power by that time. But in 1917, 1918, America brings the full muscle of its economic power to bear in Europe. For America, the war lasts only 18 months, but by the spring of 1918, we're landing 250,000 men a month on the continent. We're flooding the continent with all sorts of hardware and all sorts of food. America is just gearing up. The First World War also marks the decline of Europe in every way you can imagine. Europe was really the center of the world in 1914. England, France, Germany, Russia dominated the world. They dominated world politics. They dominated the world economy. Europe by 1919 is bankrupt, both economically and physically bankrupt. First World War gave us the first genocide in modern history, the genocide of the Turks of the Armenians in 1915. Now, we don't know how many Armenians died. Some say 500,000, some say 1 million. The number's in dispute. And to this day, the Turks deny it was genocide. To this day, the Turks maintain it was simply poor planning. They uprooted the Armenians. They took them out of their homes. They said they were disloyal. They were agents of the Russians, and they marched them to Syria and to other areas in the Middle East. They made no provisions for them at all, but hundreds of thousands died. Is it genocide? Is it not genocide? My own opinion is it was genocide. The First World War was also the genesis of all the problems we have in the Middle East today. Well, maybe not all, but many. There was no Syria, there was no Lebanon, there was no Iraq, there was no Palestine or Israel, there was no Saudi Arabia. All these entities were created after the First World War. What the European statesmen did was they divided up the Ottoman Empire into spheres of influence. For example, Kuwait. When they were creating these nation states after 1919, Kuwait should have been part of Iraq. It has historically been associated with the Shia portion of Iraq. Well, that was cut out and made a separate kingdom by the British because they knew Kuwait had the oil and they wanted to dominate the small country for its oil. In a sense, when Saddam Hussein moves into Iraq in 1990, he says he's reclaiming the 19th province of Iraq. He was telling the truth, but we didn't know our history. So they divided up the Middle East, and if you ever looked at a map of the Middle East, what do you notice? All the lines are straight. How do countries get straight lines? There are straight lines in Europe. They have straight lines because Wilson, Clemenceau, and the people who worked on that map used a ruler, and they divided them up. Did Wilson know what a Shia was, what a Kurd was? Wilson know who the Sunnis were and how they got along together? No. They just carved up states according to their own belief, and they put all these people together. Now, the Middle East was sort of a quiet place while the Turks were there. The Turks knew you didn't put the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Kurds together. They kept them separate, their own separate entities, as long as you, gave obedience to the ruler of Turkey in Istanbul. But no, the Europeans carved it up and they imposed this facade of the nation state on the Middle East. The nation state is a concept that's absolutely alien to the Middle East. In the Middle East, the political concept was the caliphate, and Turkey was, the Turkish Empire was the caliphate. All those Muslim lands were part of the caliphate, and we imposed this concept of the nation state. And not only that, we mixed all the populations up, and we're still working out those problems. They broke up the Austrian Empire, and they created new states in the Balkans. Now, the Serbs, the Hungarians, the Romanians, maybe there was nothing they could do, but those guys didn't get along. And you notice that 20 years ago, after the death of Tito, Serbia just disintegrated. And you had a civil war, and I would say genocide in Serbia, where a couple 100,000 Bosnians were killed, Bosnian Muslims were killed by the Serbians. So all these factors date back to the First World War. Now, a lot of people want to know why we had the First World War. Well, you can take it back to Germany. If there's one nation that's responsible, it's Germany. And what I mean by that is the creation of the German Empire in 1871. There had been no united Germany for 1,000 years. There had been the Holy Roman Empire or the Confederation of the Rhine. But in 1871, Germany becomes a unified state under Bismarck. The unified state is created in war, in 3 successful wars, against Denmark in 1864, against Austria in 1866, and against France in 1870. Now, it's a federated empire. It's made up of Prussia and about 30 other small princely states. And it's not a unified state. The Kaiser, who is the leader of the empire, the Kaiser means king. He's king of Prussia, but he's also the German emperor, emperor of the other states. And when Germany goes to war, each state has its own separate army. For example, in 1914, Adolf Hitler never actually serves in the German army. He's in the Bavarian army. And the Bavarians and the Prussians don't like each other. You have the Saxon army, the Bavarian army, the army of Hanover. So you have all these separate armies under the leadership of the Prussians. Although not always. The man who commanded the German army in the south, in Alsace-Lorraine, was a man called Prince Ruprecht, heir to the throne of Bavaria, which is very interesting, showing you how intertwined these monastic dynasties were. Prince Ruprecht was the Stuart pretender to the throne of England. Some would say he should have been the rightful king of England, but he's heir to the throne of Bavaria. But what happened was when Bismarck, known as the Iron Chancellor, when he creates Germany, he creates a powerful new political, economic, and military state in the center of Europe. This has a disruptive effect. This threatens France, obviously because Germany is fought a war against France, taking Alsace-Lorraine. It's threatened Russia, and Germany, and Russia and the Germans have been historically at odds for hundreds of years. And it threatens Austria. Germany had fought a war against Austria in 1866, had defeated Austria. Now, Bismarck did 2 things. Number one, he was very smart. He knew that Germany, in his opinion, had reached its maximum territorial expansion. And he doesn't want to expand it anymore beyond the borders of 1871. He knows to do this will upset the balance of power in Europe, even more so than it's upset at the present time. So he creates a system of alliances. He allies with Austria. This is the dual alliance. He has an alliance between Austria, Germany, and Russia called the Dreikaiserbund, the Three Emperors League. He has an alliance between Austria and Italy and Germany called the Triple Alliance. Now, after the young Kaiser comes to the throne, and even while the old Kaiser was there, the old Kaiser actually had a question. And that question was, we're allied with Austria. If Austria goes to war, we have to support Austria. And we're also allied with Russia. If Russia goes to war, we have to support Russia. Yes. Well, what happens if Russia and Austria go to war? And Bismarck said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. His aim was to have everybody tied to Germany, to make Berlin the fulcrum of not only the economic center of Europe, but the political center of Europe. And when the Balkans, flared up in the 1870s, he didn't allow a war to come between Austria and Russia. He called all those diplomats to Berlin, and he solved that problem. He laid out, what the settlement would be, and everybody accepted it. Bismarck did everything possible. His formula was, there are 5 nations in Europe. You want to make sure you're in an alliance with 3 of them, and you're 3 against 2. The nation he could not ally with was France. Now, he made some overtures to France, but it was not possible because France was still feeling the defeat of 1870, 71, and the French, were still feeling the loss of Alsace-Lorraine. All right, so he creates this very supple and very flexible and very dynamic system for controlling the other nations. And he was the master. He was the guy who was conducting the orchestra. But in terms of domestic politics, this is where Bismarck falls down. Bismarck is a monarchist. He wants to keep the power of the King of Prussia. He wants to keep power in the hands of the nobility. Now, this is a period of time when the people of Europe are moving toward parliamentary government. There's a parliamentary government in England. It's not a democratic government. Women cannot vote, but it's moving in that direction. France is a parliamentary government. You have parliamentary governments in Spain and Portugal and Denmark and Sweden. So this concept of having a parliament and having responsibility be in the hands of the population who vote for their delegates is sweeping over Europe. So the Kaiser, Bismarck makes a concession. He gives the German people a parliament. It's called the Reichstag. Everybody can vote for the Reichstag. But in the final analysis, the Reichstag has very little power. Germany becomes a federated state, and the power is shared between Prussia and the other states. And in the other states, although they have their assemblies, the voting is also rigged. So power really remains in the hands of the elite, the aristocracy, and especially the aristocracy of Prussia, and especially the king of Prussia. Now this is going to work very well, as long as Bismarck is the chancellor and the king of Prussia is William I, who listens to Bismarck. William I was a fine old gentleman. He was born in 1797. He was old enough to have fought in the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, and he had seen the political development, the military, economic development of Prussia. He had been in charge in 1866 and 1864, 1866, and in 1870-71. And he trusted the Kaiser. Now, William I had a son, Frederick. Frederick was married to the daughter of Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is or the daughter of Victoria, excuse me. And his wife's name is also Victoria. Victoria was very much influenced by her mother, and she wanted Germany to evolve into the type of society that England was, where you had a parliament, and parliament had real power, and the monarch was merely a figurehead. Now this made Frederick very unpopular with his father, very unpopular with Bismarck, very unpopular with the ruling classes. So, Bismarck is watching this situation. Fortunately for Bismarck, however, when the old king dies in 1888, Frederick comes to the throne. Frederick has throat cancer. He lives 3 months, then he dies. And then the king's grandson comes to the throne, Kaiser Wilhelm II, otherwise known as Kaiser Bill. Now, Kaiser Bill was born in 1859. He's the first grandchild of Victoria. Now, the birth was very difficult, and the doctors were really more worried about his mother than they were about the future king of Prussia. And the doctors used forceps to pull the Kaiser out of the birth canal there. When they did so, they dislocated his left arm. So for the rest of his life, he is hampered by a withered left arm. And he cannot cut his food. He has a hard time riding his horse. This is going to cause psychological problems. Also, the Kaiser hates his mother. Now, I don't want to get into the psychology of this, but he hates his mother and he hates his father. To say they didn't get along would be a vast understatement. Perhaps because when he was young, they gave him all sorts of medical treatments that they hoped would heal his arm. Didn't heal his arm, but they had a big effect on the Kaiser. They gave him a very strict tutor who would whack him around if he didn't learn his lessons